I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Richard Schiff has been a presence in television and film for decades now with, of course, The West Wing, but he also has multiple shows on TV right now. He has Ballers, Counterpart, and he's got The Good Doctor, where he plays Dr. Aaron Glassman. Let's take a look.
I want to be your friend again.
Why, Shaun, what happened?
People need friends.
Well, yeah, they do. But you said you wanted me to stop interfering, remember? You wanted space. You wanted to make your own mistakes.
I need a friend more than I need space. You were a good mentor and a good friend.
Well, thank you, Shaun. You don't know how much it means to me to hear you say that.
Everybody, please welcome Richard Schiff. Let's hear it. Sir, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, my pleasure.
Let's talk about your co-star in this show. You're fantastic in that scene, but this kid is walking a tightrope in doing
You're
this
fantastic
character.
in the scene, but this kid is better.
You are not up to, you're not doing exactly what he's doing, but when you sign on to a show like this, it's about a young autistic doctor. Are you worried about how that's going to come off? Do you have conversations with the producers or anything? Do you talk about who they're casting?
No. No, based on my talk with David Shore and based on reading the script, I had already known that Freddie was cast and didn't know him because I didn't see Bates Motel, which he was on. I've since seen Finding Neverland again, and but that was after I've worked with him, and he was amazing in that movie as a young kid. I'm always worried about any story being told well. You know, that's what I worry about. So the fact that this was about autism specifically wasn't any more worrisome than, you know, how do you tell the story of a White House staff, or how do you tell the story of
You still ask the same questions going into the day.
The same questions. I have autism in my family, and so it's a particularly personal subject for me. But you know, you want to tell the story the best way you can tell it, so that it's compelling and it's honest. And every story has the same issues. Those, you know.
I guess that's the question, though, is when you're trying to tell a compelling story, oftentimes you can lose what's honest because you get so focused on trying to make sure the story moves. And
Well, compelling to me is truthful.
Same.
You know, compelling to, you know, a studio in Hollywood might be different. They may need more car crashes or explosions to fit their definition of compelling, you know, which is legitimate. But my definition of that is truthful and dramatic or funny, depending upon the needs of that story.
So in the season finale, your character is diagnosed with an inoperable, I think is it a brain tumor or something, or like something in?
Trying to remember. Yeah, it's a brain tumor.
When you first started reading,
there's a name for it, but I didn't have to say it during the episode. Everyone else said it. No, I did say it during the episode, but I don't remember the name of it.
When you got that script and started reading it, were you worried that you were going to be getting killed off, or had they alerted you to what was actually going to happen?
I asked David Shore after reading the pilot, is this character dying? And he said, how do you know? And I said, there's one clue in the pilot. And he said, yeah. So I knew it was coming. I didn't know what form it was coming. No, I don't worry about it.
What do you worry about?
I worry about my children and my
They doing okay?
and my country. Yeah, they're doing great. My son, who is autistic, is traveling now in Europe and by himself, and is being very courageous and amazing. My daughter, who's also fascinating, is back home and getting ready for her senior year in high school next year, and looking at colleges and stuff, and becoming a really beautiful young woman.
That's incredible. Have you taken her to colleges to check them out? Have you had to
I
do
was
that
working, so I sadly missed that tour. My wife took her mostly on the northeast region, and NYU right here is one of her favorite places, one of her choices. So we'll see.
Does she want to act or be in entertainment? Is that her?
It's
thoughts?
it's in her to explore that possibility. Let's put it that way. But she's very artistic and has a lot of talent in terms of in other disciplines, photography being one, drawing and writing. She's really quite an incredible writer.
Did you have when you decided to become an actor? How many years did you have of kind of being a struggling actor, or sort of I would say creative person in theater before you started landing roles?
About 140 years of struggling. I still haven't quite decided if I want to be an actor. I had a circuitous path to it. I never really assumed that I would have a career. It didn't seem in the realm of possibility, given who I was back then.
Who were you?
Well, I was a Yankee fan. That's the only consistency. I was just very much reclusive and kind of pathologically quiet. But I was fascinated and curious about why some things, plays or movies, put me in the trance. You know, this trance of being swept away by a story. And
Do you remember one of those first trances that you?
yeah, and live theater, it was Equus with Anthony Perkins, comedians that Mike Nichols directed with Jonathan Pryce, movies, you know, such as The Graduate, I remember, and old movies like Meet John Doe, Frank Capra movies, and anything Spencer Tracy was in.
Can't Take It With You is a pretty incredible film.
Can't Take It With You. I was an insomniac as a young person. So in those days, you stay up and watch TV or read stuff. And in the old days, you would switch channels and great old movies would come on. I don't know how you find them nowadays, but you know, Bogart and Cagney and Spencer Tracy and the Gable movies and Frank Capra and Billy Wilder and Preston Sturgis and all these great, you know, Danny Kaye and The Court Jester. Was one
You
of
can't
my-
even find a lot of these movies on Netflix right now. They don't even have
No.
like a classic movies section.
No, there's a classic movie channel, but they don't play my movies.
I've got TCM, but they don't play a lot of the best stuff.
No, I don't think so. So I just became curious and then kind of stumbled into a theater program at City College of New York where I went, and then was invited to audition for the Davis Center for the Performing Arts, and I didn't even know it was there, but a guy named Earl Gister had come over from Carnegie Mellon, stopped at my school for the 3 years I was there in that program, then went on to run the Yale School of Drama for 12 years, and he was a master. He was one of the greats, and City College was a place where theater people in New York would go and supplement their income by teaching. So we had phenomenal people up there. Herman Shumlin, who was 90 at the time and had directed the original Inherit the Wind with Paul Muni, directed the original Grand Hotel, all of Lillian Hellman's plays, and Rhea Gaisner from the Open Theater, and Robert Macbeth from the New Lafayette Theater in Harlem, and we were doing Ed Bullen's plays, who was a Harlem playwright. It was just an incredible atmosphere, and I was lucky to get in because it was a new program, and that's how it started. But I didn't like acting; I was too afraid of it.
Even when you started doing it, you didn't like it that much?
I was too terrified, and I remember coming out. I auditioned because my girlfriend was auditioning for a play in Brooklyn called Blues for Mr. Charlie by James Baldwin, and I happened to go in and audition for a little role, and they ended up giving me the lead role. It's a play based on the Emmett Till case, the first white man ever to be brought to trial for killing a black man in Mississippi in 1954, and And it was a phenomenal experience, except I was so terrified I had to get to the theater at noon to begin my relaxation for an 8 o'clock show. And after it was done,
What did your relaxation consist
a
of?
lot of breathing and a lot of exercises, the ones that I knew at that time that I learned in college and voice class and so on. And just a lot of pacing around, and I was terrified. And I had a lot of fear in me. So that was climbing a Mount Everest, and for me to climb a Mount Everest every time I did a play was just not a, I mean, how many times do you climb Mount Everest? So I veered off into other things, and I started, I had directed in college, and I loved that, and I started my own theater company, and I was a director all throughout my 20s.
Directed Angela Bassett early on, right?
Angela Bassett in a play, her first play out of Yale, and some other really good actors. We kind of formed a little troupe, and we would find space back when Manhattan was cheap, and do theaters, which do plays, which I think they now do deep out in Brooklyn and Queens because Manhattan's too expensive. So we would find church basements and cheap theaters on 42nd Street, back when 42nd Street was 42nd Street, and next to the Burlesque House and whatever. And it wasn't until years later that I got back interested in acting again and went and studied with a guy named William Esper, who was a phenomenal master acting teacher.
What brought that on? What got you interested?
I was getting a little frustrated with the directing, and a lot of the people that I loved to direct had come from his studio, so he knew of me because I was hiring his actors. And I called him one day and I said, I'd love to talk to you about what you do because your actors are directable and they're great. And he said, well, come on in. And we talked for 45 minutes, and he said, you should take my class. And I said, I don't want to be an actor. And he said, you should take my class anyway. And I did his 2-year program while still directing. And then I kind of understood things a little better, and I was able to control my mania, my fear, and started to act after that.
Can I ask you? Just said your actors are directable and great. Have you found that oftentimes there is a great actor who isn't directable, or it's a rarity that an actor can be both?
Well, it's different from my perspective as a director, and working with actors that may or may not be directable. It's not my concern. Do you know what I mean? As long as they work with me. I don't know how they're working necessarily with a director. Some are difficult, some are ready to take direction. I'm not the easiest actor to direct.
Really?
No, because I have an opinion.
Right.
And very rarely did I run into directors that thought about it more than I did. So I would have that creative battle if it was required. Really smart directors loved that fight, and bad directors don't love that fight.
How does it usually go with bad directors?
Not well.
Flash
I mean,
forward.
in the end, you have you do your work, and over the years, I've learned how to communicate things. In a way that isn't offensive, and
it's tough. It's actually people don't realize that it's actually very tough to do that.
Well, you're fighting for your life, really. I know it sounds silly, but your creative impulses are it's what I'm here for. You know what I mean? My interpretation is of things, and the way to tell the best story is what you fight for. And and sometimes that fight is great. I had a director once when I was on a TV show. His name is Tommy Schlamme, and it was The West Wing. And early on, I fought with great intensity to save the integrity of that character. Not save it, but to enhance it. And Aaron Sorkin, loved that, and Tommy loved that. But at one point, I felt like I was going overboard, and I just stopped for 2-3 weeks. And I got a knock on my trailer one day, and it was Tommy, and he said, what's wrong? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, why aren't you fighting with me? He goes, I love our fights. I learn from our fights. Well, that's a guy who has thought about it more than I have, and if I can get him to think about it differently, he's grateful, right? Just like a writer who didn't think of a scene going that way, but is surprised in a good way by that. That's a gift, you know. And Aaron Sorkin will go around asking people for help. You know, he's writing 22 hours of television. First year, 44 hours of television, because he was writing Sports Night at the same time. He wants help. A good writer will never turn down a good idea, you know. A bad writer will, because they feel protective of, you know, there's a defensive mechanism, because somewhere they know that there's maybe a weakness, I don't know. But good writers, they want it to be better, and who doesn't want it to be better? It's the same with a good actor who gets a direction that seems weird at first, but wait a second, that's better. That makes the scene better. That makes the work better. So, you know, I always fight for that.
You know, you mentioned this James Baldwin play that was your first play that you were in, that you got the lead in. You're a fairly politically active person, and you speak about politics regularly. Was that was that play the beginning of your political awakening, or were you always, even before that, a bit more conscious of what was going on in the world?
Well, I grew up in the Nixon era and in the Vietnam era, and I was just a little bit young, but the draft ended literally the year before I turned 18. My brother had a number that he didn't get drafted.
Yeah, I saw it recently. I heard recently that, and I couldn't believe that I didn't know this, but at times it was like 30 to 35,000 kids a month would get drafted.
Yeah, well, hundreds of thousands, because, you know, that was the deployment of troops was into the 500,000, I think, in Vietnam at some point in '68 when the what do you call it, when it was intensified after the Tet Offensive, and then it became, you know, Johnson kept escalating and not de-escalating, and
That's when I think it was. It was like Johnson period. It had gone up to 35,000 a month or something.
yeah,
It's most. Yeah.
yeah. I know that if you read or look at the documentaries, the Burns documentary about Vietnam, I mean, it was the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, we found out, was a phony, it was a fake, it was a wag the dog, similar to the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, a fake reason to go to war, and people I knew were dying, and to be lied to, and then to find out that your president is a crook. It led to a very, I did not have a lot of faith in mainstream government. So I was on the streets. I was demonstrating against the war when I was 13, going to D.C. and the moratorium. I had never seen D.C. until we shot the West Wing there. I didn't know it was a beautiful city, because when I was there, it was full of tear gas and riot police and 500,000 demonstrators, you know. With garbage flying everywhere, and you were crying the whole time you were there from the tear gas. So that was my indoctrination into the political world. So I was not anywhere near mainstream. I wasn't campaigning for candidates because I didn't trust them, you know.
Where are you right now?
And what's interesting now is that that in those days, the FBI was an enemy of anything progressive and anything on the left, as was the press. And now everything's reversed. We're relying on the FBI, and we're relying on the free press to save us.
Well, we're so far right, we're desperate for some form of centrism. We can't even have a conversation about right or left anymore.
If the left-right dial is like a clock, and it used to be 3 o'clock to the right and 9 o'clock to the left, the dial has just completely moved over the last 30, 40 years, so that, you know, and the center is now, what used to be the center is now considered the extreme left.
Yeah, which, I mean, you don't even really see anybody of leftist opinions on television talking.
Richard Nixon had a national health care plan much more liberal than Barack Obama's.
Set up the EPA as well, right? Nixon did.
That's right.
And
Nixon's domestic policies would now be considered socialist.
he was also in talks to create a universal basic income, which has its drawbacks and its pros and cons, and many on the right still kind of think about it, but the far right doesn't really at all. It's
We're in the most dangerous times in my lifetime.
You think so?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that when you think about your family and your kids and all that stuff?
Well, I mean,
Just keep living.
Yeah. It's a question for many people around the world. How do people in Palestine and in Israel, and how do people in Lebanon? There's a way of life which is let's make sure we have a good day today. Let's make sure we enjoy our meals today. But we, you fight the good fight however you can. In this case, I think there's going to be a real fight to save this country. Its tradition, its history, its attempts at a democracy. We've come a long way from slavery and from apartheid and social injustice and economic inequality, which was obviously much worse in the early part of the 20th century. Child labor. We didn't have unions until the 30s and into the, So we've come a long way, but now our basic institutions are being threatened. The courts are being threatened. The free press is being threatened. Congress is capitulating with a dictator.
Excuse me. When you worked on The West Wing, obviously that was in the 90s, the 90s going into the early 2000s, right? I think it ended in the early 2000s or
2006.
2006, excuse me. What was it like to be sort of telling the story of I think, an inspiring, positive idea of an administration, of an American administration, while at the same time the Bush White House was in effect?
We started during the Clinton administration, which was fun. And when we were in Washington, the White House gate was like a summer screen door swinging open for us. We could go in and visit. I would visit the writers downstairs in the West Wing. And
really?
Oh, yeah. And we would go out with the staff. And Democrats like to drink. Republicans like to drink secretly. But Democrats like to go out and have a party. So they would go, and we'd go out with them. And, it was a great learning tool for me to befriend these people.
Did it give you more faith in the system itself and the checks and balances and how the system works out?
What gave me more faith in it was the junior staffers.
Really?
The young people had very strong idealism, very strong goals. They were unaffected, if you will, by the way compromise wears on your skin. They were really inspiring. A lot of the staffers in the Clinton White House, and even the young staffers in the Bush administration, were open-eyed and thinking they were doing the good work. The Bush administration invited us to say hello. W wouldn't say hello to us because a lot of us campaigned against him, but the staffers did. Chief of staff and so on, and they were very polite. But it was, I always thought that we didn't have a positive effect on the political world, the West Wing, because in 2004, George W. actually won that election. He didn't in 2000, somehow became president, but in 2004, he actually won. So I thought we were having a negative effect. And then in 2008, I was campaigning with Joe Biden when he was running for president, so in Iowa and so on. And everywhere I went, and I was at the early debates as well, the Obama foot soldiers would surround me and say, you're the reason why we're here. You're the reason why we're doing this. I still get it in D.C. young staffers and ACLU lawyers and whoever, the West Wing, you're the reason why we're doing this. And I always say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make your life miserable and unaffordable. But
Do you ever get any people from the right say that to you at all?
yeah,
Really?
yeah. No, and in those days as well, Republicans would come up. General Haig came up to me at a brunch and came walking towards me, and I thought I was going to be arrested. Then he pointed to me and he goes, "You, I find your show eerie," meaning it was a lot like his real job, or of his many jobs. But what was the point I was getting at? So the Obama foot soldiers, when you think about it, made the difference in that election because Obama won the primary season and the nomination mostly because of the caucus states. And the caucus states were won mostly because he had such a vast army of foot soldiers who canvassed and went door to door and so on. So you can point to the West Wing as having an effect over that election.
In the sense that you were campaigning for not Obama and
Not me personally, no. But I was campaigning with Joe Biden because, first of all, I love the guy, and second of all, I didn't tell him this, but I was pretty sure he wasn't going to win. But I thought his voice to stay in the debate as long as possible was a good thing, and he was, in my mind, so good in the debates and an honest man. He's never taken a dime from special interests. And that's why I was supporting him. And they would say, "Do you want to meet Barack?" And I would go, "No, because I'll switch." So
you knew you could see the charisma.
I knew I was going to vote for him and I was going to support him. My loyalty was to Biden.
Have you met him since?
No,
Whoa, you missed your chance there.
I did.
Let's get some questions from our audience. Who's a question?
Hi.
Hello.
Since you've dabbled in theater, film, and television, which of the three do you prefer? Because I see you've done a lot of television.
There's nothing better and more rewarding, partly because of its degree of terror, than doing a great play. There's nothing better. And there's nothing worse on earth than doing a bad play. So for me, I like to pick stories. I just go by stories. So there's so whether it's TV or film, which I don't find much of a difference except if you're on a series and then you're doing one character for a long time, which is a very different experience. But the actual work in front of a camera, I find very similar between film and television. It's just the way you tell the story is a little bit different. But I like it when it feels good at the end of the day. I don't watch the shows and the movies that I do.
You never watched The West Wing?
I watched after about 6 years. I watched the first 2 seasons, and then because I do the West Wing podcast on occasion, which is something that West Wing fans should look up if they haven't heard it yet. Where they talk about every single episode. So it's in year 4 now, and whenever I'm on, I will watch the episode that we're talking about, and then I'll get stuck and I'll go, I'll watch the next one. This is pretty good.
Next question. I think this is our last question.
Thank you. I'm very impressed with your enthusiasm and quiet, reserved passion for politics and government and the miserable government that we have now. Cynthia Nixon, with no experience but sharing acting, has jumped into the political scene. You have 6 years' experience as a communications director in the White House.
Not going to happen.
Well, how do you feel about deeper involvement in politics and the like?
I would much rather not be bothered. I would much rather focus on my family and baseball and, taking a nice vacation and putting better. You know what I mean? I wish we were in a place where I didn't have to check the newspapers every day and find out what corruption it might take us down next. You know, this Michael Avenatti revelations are quite fascinating, for instance, and yet
Is it like $4.2 million or something like that now that they're
total?
finding?
Yeah, I'm sure it's climbing as we speak, and pulling out of the Iran deal. I mean, it's just, it never stops, and this particular man, and we're New Yorkers, right? Everybody here is a New Yorker. We knew for 40 years that this guy is a clown and is a fraud and is a crook. We've known that. 87% of Manhattan voted against him, right? But the rest of the country has, for many reasons I understand, have bought into this destructionism, really. And I don't think everyone quite knows to the degree that what he says out loud he means. I want to destroy the state. You know, he said that. I will not trust an election in which I lose. Well, now he's got the army at his disposal. What happens if he loses the next election? You know, these are things he's all said out loud many times, and we're not hearing it because of all the other noise. He's out there to take us down. And look at the psychology of anyone who has been left out, which I guess he feels he has been from the Manhattan thing. I don't know. I don't really care what his psychology is, but you know, I do know he has the power of an 8-year-old who sees a beautiful sandcastle on a beach, and you think, how long did it take to build that sandcastle, and how long does it take an 8-year-old to destroy it? And so that's what we're up against. You know.
Richard Schiff, the good doctor, is on.
Cynthia Nixon, by the way, I'm gonna go to a fundraiser for her, and she's much smarter than me. Very, very smart.
Fantastic. You're a supporter?
I'm going to find out if I am.
Oh, really? You haven't decided yet?
I don't know her that well, so, and not living in the city. Sadly, I want to move back as fast as I can, but I'm not as up on the local issues as I might otherwise be. But from everything that I'm understanding and hearing from people that know her and support her, yeah. Do you support Cynthia Nixon? Yeah. And Cuomo is a whole nother ballgame. So yeah.
The Good Doctor is on ABC. You have another show right now called Counterpart as well, right? Where does that air?
That's on Stars, and that's great. J.K.
Yeah.
Simmons and Olivia Williams, and I love working on that show. I have a great time. It's very, very intense and great storytelling. It's the kind of story. I have no fights on that set. I love Justin Marks and Amy Berg, who wrote the first season. I really enjoy that show. I recommend people find it.
No fights, because when you bring up issues that you have or things that you want to talk about, people can handle it and want to talk.
Very rarely do I do a story where I'm asking questions, because I will read and reread and reread, but the writer has secrets down the road, and I don't quite know everything. And it's so well constructed that I'm as curious, so I know audiences will be, oh my God, what's going to happen? I don't. You know, this is so bizarre. This is so fascinating, and that's how I am. So I have to ask him questions, and he's great at making it clear for me. I might have a discussion or two with the director as to how a certain scene will go, but yeah, it's a real. It's like doing. You know, I've done plays of Eugene O'Neill, you know, and David Mamet, and you know, you don't challenge the writer, you know what I mean?
You don't challenge David Mamet.
No, I mean, first of all, you'd lose a fist fight with him, and second of all, you know, it's beautifully crafted writing, and that's what Justin Marks and Amy Berg have done for Counterpart. And
Is it? I always wonder with writers like Mamet, and especially something like Eugene O'Neill, it's beautiful writing. Sometimes it's not very direct, and it's not clear with intention. So I'm wondering sometimes if that makes it harder, even though the writing is beautiful.
It's clear if you extricate the script. I mean, it's not clear from the first reading maybe, but you do your work and you you're a detective and you look for clues and you go, oh, this is what's happening. This is what he's doing. People lie in life, right? I mean, we're finding that out every day on television, and great writers write characters that aren't just going to tell you what they're doing, and you believe it. You know, like great writers will explore the complications of relationships that people have with each other and what they're hiding from each other and what secrets they're protecting, and the very complicated way that they will go about getting what they want. That's what Mamet understands. That's certainly what O'Neill, who was exploring the soul, understands, and that's what makes it so exciting for me, because it's a gigantic puzzle. It's a great Sphinx riddle, you know, and when you make discoveries, it's revelatory and exciting.
And another plug is Ballers coming back this.
Yes,
yeah,
Ballers,
it's on its way back,
I
right?
was a little busy this year, so I only got to do 2 Ballers, but
Is that a fun show to do?
so much fun. So
Really,
much fun.
when I've seen that show, it really just looks like all the guys are just kind of showing up and having a good time.
All the guys are showing up and having a good time. Yeah. It's and DJ The Rock is just a great guy, and Rob Corddry is a brilliant comic actor, and I get to play on that level, and you know, those guys will let me do what I want, and then they'll kind of shift it so that their story is being told properly, and that's a great working relationship. Steve Levinson's the producer there, and yeah, I have a great time. I'm very sad that I only got to do a couple this year.
Richard Schiff, thanks so much for being here. Everybody, please give Richard Schiff a round of applause.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys.